Now, I grew up in Sandyville, Jackson County, West Virginia, and a long time ago, and I sometimes think about those days. And tonight I want to tell you about an incident that occurred way back there. As I remember, it was a bright, sunshiny day, and I was sitting on what had once been old Doc Curry's house and office and hospital, they said, with Mr. Johnson. He's the current resident there, and he was sitting there playing with a little mole. Now, you know, a mole is a little mouse-like creature that burrows under the ground. And out in the front yard was a pump, water pump, where people stopped by from time to time, you know, to get a drink of water. And I'm sure at one time it probably had a tin cup hanging there, but now it had one of the pretty little gourds, you know, that they cut part of it off and make a dipper or a drinking gourd out of, and that was hanging there. And there was three young men, painting the wood trim on the house. And we were just sitting there enjoying the weather, you know, and down the road came Germ Pickens. He's a local resident there. Now, Germ was not the village drunk. He was not the village drunk, but he did like to have a drink on occasion. And so Germ turned in at the gate, you know, and he walked up and he asked Mr. Johnson, he said, well, what's going on here? And Mr. Johnson said, well, now these three boys, they have agreed to paint the trim on this house for 1 gallon of moonshine, but they don't need or want any help. Well, Germ was disappointed. He was disappointed, but he walked around the side of the house pretending like he was inspecting the job. And when he walked around the side, why, he saw a quart mason jar sitting there. It was about half full of a clear liquid. And he figured that was probably a down payment on those boys' pay. And so he walked over and nobody was watching, so he picked up that there jar and he took the lid off, and he figured that if he could take a couple of swigs out of that, nobody looking, why, nobody would know any difference, you know? So he tipped that jar up real fast and he took a drink. And that's when he finally found out that wasn't moonshine in that there jar. It was turpentine that those boys were using to clean out their paintbrushes and things with. Well, Germ grabbed his throat and he ran to that pump out in the front yard and to get some water to put out the fire in his throat, and he started pumping that there handle, and he took the drinking gourd in his left hand and he started pumping. And he was unaware, though, that there was a little lizard that living up in the handle of that there drinking gourd. And when that lizard saw that water coming out, why, it scared the daylights out of it. And when Germ lifted that gourd up to his mouth, well, that there lizard saw this dark hole that was Germ's throat, you know, and it figured the safest thing for it to do was to jump down that hole, and so that's what it did. And Germ now, he grabbed his throat with both hands now, and he started hacking and coughing, and he fell down on the ground. And Mr. Johnson, seeing this strange behavior on Germ's part, well, he ran over and squatted down. Yet he knew that there was a little lizard that lived in that drinking gourd from time to time, and he thought he probably had the solution to Germ's problem right there in his hand in the form of that there little mole. So what he did was he put that mole up Germ's right pant leg, and he clamped his hands down around the bottom of the pants, and that mole ran right up Germ's right leg, you know, and being a burrowing animal, it saw what it thought was a burrow and it dived right in. And old Germ now, he really started coughing and hacking and rolling around. And finally, Germ regurgitated. Now, for some of you less than sophisticated people, that means he throwed up. He throwed up right there. And right there in that regurgitation was that little lizard. And clamped onto that lizard's tail was that little mole, and its eyes were clamped shut, and it was shivering all over, and there wasn't a hair left on its body. Now, Germ, he went over to Ripley, the county seat, to see old Doc Casto, because he had been through this ordeal. And Doc Casto gave him a thorough examination. And when he got through, he said, well, Germ, I got good news for you. In fact, I got 2 bits of good news for you. He said the first is that you'll suffer no permanent damage whatsoever from this ordeal. And Germ said, well, what's the second piece of good news? And Doc Casto said, well, the second piece of good news, he says, you won't have to have a colonoscopy for at least another 5 years. So that's the way it was when I was a boy back there growing up in Sandyville, Jackson County, West Virginia.